Hey there, welcome to Murder Most British. I'm Rachel, and this week we've given Zach the week off. I've a special guest with me, a special guest host. So excited. Introduce yourself, my friend.
Greetings, Wanderers. I'm Fauna Blakewell from the Echoes from the Loam podcast. Thanks for having me. This story sits right at that eerie edge between horror and reality, so I can't wait to get stuck in.
It really does. Welcome anyway. So, a teenage killer, supposed deal with a demon, and two sisters whose night of celebration turned into tragedy.
It's one of those cases that sounds like fiction until you realise that every part of it happened.
Yeah. Well, it started like every birthday should. Friends, fairy lights, the sound of laughter under summer trees. But somewhere in the dark, another plan was already moving toward them. One written not in ink, but in blood. Ooh, spooky.
I know, already. So, it's London, June 2020. It was uneasy, but waking. The first lockdown had loosened, and people were learning how to be together again. Small gatherings in parks, distant laughter on the wind, the sound of traffic slowly returning to life. In northwest London, Fryent Country Park stretched like a green pocket between the suburbs. Its long grass uncut, pathways hidden under the weight of early summer. By day, it was a space for quiet walks and stolen sunlight. But by night, a dark sprawl where foxes slipped through fields unseen.
Well, among those who loved such places were Bibaa Henry and Nicole Smallman, sisters whose closeness drew people in. Bibaa, 46, had spent 2 decades in social work for Brent Council. The colleague who could hold a crisis steady with patience alone. She was grounded, careful, with an easy laugh that lightened the rooms that she worked in. Nicole, at 27, was the opposite kind of calm, spontaneous, creative, a photographer who found beauty in small, overlooked moments. She lived in Wembley, sharing a flat with friends, and filled her walls with prints from her own camera. City skylines, reflections in windows, strangers at ease.
They had grown up between Brent and South London and were the daughters of Mina Smallman, an Anglican priest whose faith shaped their early years. Mina had made history as the first woman of colour to become an archdeacon in the Church of England. Her daughters had inherited that same mix of care and independence, one working to improve lives, the other capturing them.
By 2020, both women had settled into steady rhythms. Bibaa worked long hours in safeguarding and still made time for her circle of friends. Weekend picnics, pub lunches, the small ceremonies of life, normal life. She had a gift for gathering people. Nicole, still building her photography career, had taken temporary work in retail to stay afloat during the lockdown. Friends said she had a magnet energy, the kind that filled silence easily. Her relationship with her boyfriend, Adam Stone, was a close one, the kind that ran on shared jokes and small kindnesses.
That summer, rules were beginning to ease. After months of isolation, people were making plans again. Careful, half-secret ones that felt like steps backward toward the world. Parks became social spaces, birthdays returned, though smaller than before. And Bibaa's own birthday fell on the first Friday of June, and she planned a low-key evening with a few friends outdoors, a picnic, some food, music from a phone speaker, just a night to mark surviving the months that had passed them.
Yeah, oh God, remembering the lockdowns, that was crazy.
It was
The first one, 4 months.
I know,
mean,
it was just horrendous.
Yeah, and getting back to normal sort of life, socialising, things like that. I mean, it felt great. It absolutely felt great. And it was nice that it was around her birthday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, for both sisters, the park offered exactly what the moment called for. Open air, quiet company, a place that felt safe and private. The kind of space where the city's noise couldn't reach them, where for a few hours they could simply exist in peace, beneath the tall grass and the fading light. Friday the 5th of June 2020 began warm and still, the kind of early summer day that made people linger outside.
Well, across London, parks filled again after weeks of absence, the air carrying that mix of relief and unease that defined the first release from lockdown. At Fryent Country Park, the grass had grown high, gold in the light, tall enough to brush against knees. Paths wove through the fields and climbed towards Barn Hill, where a line of trees caught the last sun before it dropped behind Wembley.
That afternoon, Bibaa Henry packed food and blankets for a small birthday picnic. Friends brought cake, drinks and fairy lights wound around plastic poles to brighten the space once the sun had dipped. Nicole Smallman arrived later, camera slung over her shoulder as always. The group spread out in the clearing, music playing low from a phone speaker. There was laughter, the sound of bottles opening, and a rare kind of stillness between them. Not silence, but calm.
Through the evening, the small gathering felt like a celebration of everything ordinary that people had missed. Faces uncovered, laughter shared without a screen between them. Friends came and went, some staying longer, others leaving before midnight as the air cooled. Nicole took pictures throughout, snapping friends mid-laugh, the glow of fairy lights against the dusk, Bibaa smiling beneath the tree line. Later, those photographs would become the only record of the night, though no one there could have imagined that yet.
Well, let's find out what happened. By all accounts, the mood was light. The sisters were at ease. There was no arguments, no tension, which you usually would get with siblings. No strangers approaching the group. Just a circle of friends, a patch of long grass, and the slow approach of midnight. Bibaa's colleagues remembered her saying earlier that week how grateful she was to finally celebrate outdoors. Nicole had teased her for bringing too much food, calling her mum mode. It was the kind of affectionate rhythm that defined their relationship, one steady, one spontaneous, each grounding it the other.
Sounds a bit like us.
Yeah. We're like sisters that are not blood related, but we're pretty much sisters.
Absolutely. Well, as the sky darkened, fairy lights traced faint halos around the picnic area. The group thinned as people began to head home, leaving the sisters behind to finish their drinks and talk. They had always been the last to leave gatherings, the ones who lingered to tidy up or keep the conversation going. And when the others waved goodbye and disappeared down the path, Bibaa and Nicole stayed, a final quiet hour between them and the kind that needed no audience.
Sounds a bit like us, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, at that point, Fryent Park had emptied almost entirely. The hum of traffic from the North Circular drifted across the hill, and the city beyond seemed so far away. The sisters sat among the grass, lights still glowing faintly around them, music fading to a low pulse. To anyone passing at a distance, it would have looked like a small single celebration continuing past curfew. Two women talking under a sky that was beginning to dim.
It was peaceful, ordinary. Two sisters sitting side by side under a wide open sky. The kind of small, unremarkable moment that should have ended like any other birthday, with laughter fading into the dark and everyone making it home. But that was the last time anyone saw them alive.
How sad.
And on her birthday.
Yeah. It's very, very sad. I mean, I've never, obviously, like I said in the last episode, I don't proofread, I don't read these beforehand. So, I never know what sort of case I'm talking about in detail. So coming across, different sort of circumstances on how this goes from a nice little gathering, you expect nothing bad to happen. They'll just wind down and go home with a happy smile on their face. But this night, by midnight, the lights at Fryent Park were fading. The last photos on Nicole's phone, two sisters smiling, the fairy lights still glowing behind them. After that, nothing more was posted.
They were alone by then. Friends who'd been there earlier had already walked back toward the main road. The park stretched empty, long grass moving in the wind, the sound of distant traffic rolling through the dark.
Well, somewhere beyond the field, another figure was moving. Later, investigators would trace his route, a route traced from his home in southeast London to the park in northwest London, leading straight into the park after midnight. He was young, just 18. His name was Danyal Hussein,
In the hours before that night, Hussein had travelled across the city carrying a backpack. Inside were knives he'd brought online and a handwritten note, a pact, he'd called it, promising to sacrifice 6 women in exchange for wealth and protection from a demon he named Lucifuge Rofakal. The document was written on lined paper and signed in his own blood.
Jesus.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, the Lucifuge Rofakal that he's chosen is a higher demon. He's an infernal demon.
Oh, okay.
He was described as the Prime Minister of Hell and Lucifer's treasurer. And he's one of the demons that's actually written in the Grand Grimoire.
Right.
Yeah, which is said to contain instructions on how to summon demons like Lucifuge
Mm.
in order to create your diabolical pact or Faustian bargain. But what's interesting is that they don't usually call for ritualistic sacrifice.
Okay.
It's normally a token offering.
This is interesting. Very
But
interesting.
I will delve into that a little as we go on a little bit further.
A little bit further along. Yeah, brilliant. Give us more detail on that because obviously I'm not aware of this demon type of stuff, but which is great with you because obviously with your podcast, I'm starting to learn about all these different things.
It's my area of specialty for sure.
Well, they're really good. Well, he believed he had made a deal at Fryent Park, quiet and dark, became the place where he intended to keep his end of it. In the early hours of Saturday, the 6th of June 2020, before about 2:30 a.m., Hussein found them. There was no evidence that Bibaa or Nicole saw him coming. The clearing was deep inside the park, almost invisible from the path. He moved through the long grass, watching them before stepping forward.
The attack was fast and frenzied. Bibaa Henry suffered 8 stab wounds. Nicole Smallman suffered 40 and had
Jesus.
defensive injuries to her hands and her arms. One of the sisters had tried to run, and the other decided to fight back. The fairy lights they'd wrapped around the poles were torn down in the struggle, and the grass around them was flattened and darkened.
Jesus.
40 stab wounds.
That is a lot. That is, I mean, luckily defensive in the sense that she was trying so hard to fight him off and protect not just herself, but obviously her sister too. And it's just horrendous. Well,
Absolutely.
the pathologist later said that the wounds were sustained and inflicted with considerable force. When it was over, Hussein stole both the phones, wandered the park trying to access one, then threw both into a pond before leaving.
For hours, the park stayed untouched. The lights that had made it warm and bright just an hour earlier now flickered weakly in the dark. From the road above, there was no sign of what had happened beneath the hill, just an empty stretch of green at the edge of the city.
Well, by sunrise, dew had already covered the ground. Joggers passed by nearby without knowing. It was not until the afternoon of Sunday, the 7th of June 2020, that anyone realised that the 2 sisters who'd spent the night celebrating had never made it home. Morning came slowly to Fryent Park. The sun rose over the hill, pale and hazy, light in the same patch of grass where the fairy lights had burned the night before. For hours, the clearing lay untouched, food containers damp with dew, a blanket still spread across the ground, and bottles tipped in the grass.
Well, by late morning, friends began to message the sisters. No one had heard from them since the night before, and it just wasn't like them. Bibaa was organised. She always checked in, and Nicole's phone showed no new posts, no replies, and calls went unanswered. Through the day, the messages turned to worry, with friends texting each other, retracing who'd left when, whether anyone had seen them walking out of the park. And one by one, the stories matched. The sisters had stayed behind, happy, laughing, perfectly fine, and then nothing.
I think the same with us, I mean, you'd find it abnormal had nobody sort of heard from you at all or seen you post on lost social media, and, it would make you think, oh, something might have happened because we haven't heard from this person. And Or
Especially when it's especially when it's two of them.
yeah, yeah. If you haven't heard from, I mean, you would have thought that you'd hear from one, but if not both, but to not hear from either of them, definitely worrying.
Yeah.
On Sunday, the 7th of June, Bibba's boyfriend, Oliver Houghton, and two friends went back to the park. They followed the path they knew that from the photos, through the tall grass to the clearing. The fairy lights were still there, half buried in the mud. Empty glasses, a folded blanket. For a moment, it looked like a picnic left in a hurry. Then, just beyond the lights, they saw what the rising sun had missed.
The bodies lay side by side, hidden by grass that had grown tall enough to conceal them until you were right there. It was quiet, there was no sound but the wind. The scene was still, almost peaceful, except for the violence that had passed through it.
One of the friends screamed. Another ran back toward the path. There was shock first, then disbelief, then silence. The kind that comes when the brain refuses to accept what their eyes are seeing. The fairy lights were still faintly glowing, their battery packs dying in the dusk. In that fading light, the clearing looked like it had been frozen in time, caught between celebration and horror.
It's just awful.
It's horrific. Absolutely horrific.
News travelled fast through the small circles of families and friends. People called each other, voices cracking mid-sentence. No one could make any sense of it. Two sisters, one celebrating a birthday, the other there to take photographs. Gone in a place that had felt safe only hours earlier.
Jesus. Well, by nightfall, the park that had once felt so open and calm seemed haunted. The long grass swayed in the wind, fairy lights blinkered away weakly, and the laughter that had filled that space was replaced by a silence that stretched far beyond it.
A single pair of shoes had been left near the blanket, one upright and the other on its side. A half-empty drink, a camera still on the ground. Everyday things that made the scene harder to look at because they spoke of what had been normal, of a night that should have ended with two sisters walking home together. And for everyone who knew them, that moment, the discovery, the stillness, the unreality of it would never really fade.
Absolutely horrendous. I mean, stumbling on people that you love in that sort of way is just unimaginable. I couldn't imagine.
No, it's something that will stay with you.
Yeah, definitely. Very shocking. Absolutely saddened. Well, by the time daylight fell again over Fryent Park, the clearing had turned into something unrecognisable, quiet, contained, and lined with white markers. Every footprint, every patch of grass, every object still standing was photographed before anyone touched the thing. The picnic blanket was recovered nearby, its edges damped and pressed into the soil. Near it, they noted empty glasses, bottles, a set of fairy lights tangled with a phone charger. A half-eaten birthday cake sat inside an open container, the icing now greyed with dew.
Searchers spread out in slow grids, tracing the ground for anything that didn't belong. And in the grass nearby, officers recovered the knife used in the killings, blood-stained, lying flat in the grass. A few meters further, they found a torn piece of fabric, possibly from a bag, small, but enough to suggest that whoever had done this hadn't vanished.
Well, teams began retracing routes from the park to nearby roads. The path that curved south towards the North Circular carried the most promise. Faint shoe impressions in soft soil, a pattern that looked newer than the rest. Each mark was logged and photographed, though the heat and foot traffic made them fragile.
Beyond the physical evidence came the canvas. Residents near the park were asked about sounds that night, voices, cars, anyone walking around after midnight. Most said that they'd heard nothing. The wind had been strong. A few mentioned seeing lights flickering in the distance, the same fairy lights that had marked the birthday picnic, but none had seen another person moving through the dark.
The work turned to tracing movements. From the sisters' phones, investigators confirmed the final photo was taken at 1:13 a.m. and an attempt to unlock Bibba's phone occurred at 1:26 a.m. Both phones were removed from the scene and later recovered in a nearby pond. Their car was parked nearby. Whoever attacked them had come on foot and left the same way.
Well, across northwest London, CCTV cameras became the next frontier. It wasn't as simple as it sounds now. In 2020, public surveillance was widespread but fragmented. Dozens of private systems, dot cameras, transport feeds. It took days to pull all the images together.
Well, still, the breakthrough came from that patchwork. In the days that followed, the CCTV trawls across northwest London began to build a picture of a lone figure moving through the streets near the park around the time of the murders. The footage was grainy, but showed a young man in dark clothing carrying a backpack. The timing matched the last phone activity from the sisters, the first clear lead.
Our investigators began mapping his path backwards, one frame at a time. In each clip, he moved with purpose, avoiding lights, keeping to the edges of the streets. By morning, they had a name to chase. And when they compared DNA from the recovered knife and the nearby items, forensic analysis produced a partial profile. Through familial DNA, identified a potential relative. It was the kind of trace that only appeared through familial DNA comparison, and it gave the investigators their first real lead.
That's real good that they can do that nowadays, isn't it? Like, obviously, I've watched loads of like other cases where through, like, from with cold cases, through using the familial DNA sort of system that they're doing, they can kind of cross it and really find out who pinpoint basically backwards to who's committed a crime that could have happened like 30, 40 years ago. I think it's amazing how it's come along. DNA has come along
Yeah,
so much,
100%.
as much as it has. I mean, you're looking back in the 80s even, they didn't have DNA sort of testing. I mean, they'd take DNA, but they'd just have to store it. There's no way to test it back then. But yeah, it's so brilliant how they can do all this now.
Yeah, I mean, you think how many old cold cases are being solved now because of that DNA familial link testing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it there's families out there that, maybe from decades and decades ago, that might not still be with us, but their, other sons, daughters, other relatives would actually find out what happened to their loved ones, So this familial DNA stuff is really, really good.
Yeah, it brings closure to so many people.
Most definitely. Well, that single trace would lead them directly towards a teenager from southeast London, someone with no prior offences, no known connection to the victims, and yet suddenly at the centre of it all. As one senior investigator said later, the evidence told a story long before anyone spoke. It just needed someone to listen properly.
Well, the partial DNA profile from Fryent Park was enough to open a door. It wasn't a full match to anyone in the national database, but it was close. Close enough to suggest a relative of someone who was. When the sample was run through familial tracing, a name surfaced. Danyal Hussein, 18 years old, from southeast London, no previous convictions, no warning flags, nothing that suggested violence.
Well, detectives moved quickly. They traced his address to a quiet cul-de-sac in Blackheath, a semi-detached house where he lived with his mother. From the outside, it was ordinary, a trimmed hedge, a blue car in the drive, curtains drawn tight against the summer sun. The search team arrived in silence. Inside, Hussein's bedroom looked like any other teenager's, clothes on the floor, game console glowing on standby. But what they found, tucked into a drawer, stopped everyone in the room.
Handwritten note, scrawled on lined paper, signed in blood. It was dated June 2020. The words were uneven, but the meaning was unmistakable. A pact with a demon called Lucifuge Ruffacol. Hussein had promised 6 murders every 6 months in exchange for wealth and power, and the note was marked with his own signature and a smear of blood.
Wow, so 6 murders every 6 months. So if he's killed these 2, he could have, so he was doing 6. Was there another 4,
Well, I think they were the first because it was
Right.
dated June 2020, I think
Yeah.
they were the first in the six.
Wow.
But as I said before, it's interesting that
Mm.
he's chosen lucifuge.
Mm.
So lucifuge, his name itself comes from two Latin words, lux meaning light and fugio meaning to flee. So his name literally means he who flees from the light.
Right.
So, like I said before, he was kind of Lucifer's right hand man, and through using these paths, um, but like I said, it was normally a token gesture.
Mm.
It was never, it's very rare that demons call for sacrifice. They normally ask you for a little token gesture, you make your pact, and they come back to claim what's theirs further down the line. So in the book, in the grimoire,
Mm.
it actually states in there that Lucifuge's demands were give thyself over to me in 50 years to do with thy soul as I please.
Mm.
So he was never, never one for sacrifice.
Yeah.
But it's
I mean,
interesting.
this guy is so young. I mean, being 18, where do you think he would have sort of learnt about this lucifuge, like demon type stuff, like internet, more than
Well,
likely.
this is
But how do you come
where
across this stuff? Would you?
modern media,
Yeah.
you think TV shows like, watching TV shows like Supernatural, like
Mm.
Charmed, like Vampire Diaries, you know, the paranormal is everywhere now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can only take something like that to
You just
plant
stumble across.
suggestion in the
Yeah.
mind of somebody who's clearly not
It's like
okay.
whether, would he have just stumbled across this type of stuff or actively seeked it out, So it's a bit strange, mainly because obviously I've growing up and nobody I know have sort of gone into, all of this. It's like back in the day though, we didn't really have the internet like we do now. So it's
No, exactly. Now
a
the
lot more prominent.
information's yeah, and the information's at your fingertips. You
Yeah.
can
Not just
literally
the
type
internet,
in
obviously TV shows like you said.
yeah, but you can literally type into Google which demon is in charge of money, wealth, and power, and it will tell
Yeah.
you. And then it will tell you where to find that information in books like the Grand Grimoire.
That's
It's
madness.
it is. It's just insane.
Well, next to this note lay a second document, a contract for protection from the demon. In case he was caught, it was sealed with the same signature and the same blood. On his computer, a folder of bookmarked pages about occult rituals, demonic pacts, and online spell guides. Under his bed was a set of newly purchased knives and one missing from the set. The receipt was dated the 3rd of June of 2020 from Asda in Colindale, 2 days before the killings.
I see. There you go. Like they found it on his computer. All these folders that he'd
Mhm.
been finding all this information, but there's no way you could have a protection like a get out clause. I got caught and I
Mm.
can't complete my pact. Like,
Yeah.
please let me keep the money. It doesn't quite work that way.
No, no.
Well, when he was arrested, Hussein actually said very little. He denied knowing the sisters, denied being in the park, denied writing the note, but his injuries told a different story. He had deep cuts across his right hand, defensive wounds from the night of the attack.
In his first interview, he claimed he'd been mugged weeks earlier, that the cuts came from trying to fend off the strangers. He couldn't explain the DNA link or the bloodstains on the pact. When asked directly about the name Lucifuge Roffakel, he paused for several seconds before saying flatly, "I don't know what that is."
Forensic teams compared his handwriting to the notes that they found in the drawer. The same slant, same pressure, and the same flourishes on the letter R. When matched against the signature in blood, it was definitive. By late July, investigators had the full sequence: the DNA link from the sheath, the CCTV timeline, the blood match note, and the knife purchase.
In this day and age, I don't understand how people think that they can get away with stuff. Like forensic, I'm really big into forensics, inside of the investigations and things. And the forensic technologies that, you know, that they use nowadays. How can you sit there and say when they've got all this stuff, how can you deny it? It's bloody ridiculous.
I think that's the most ridiculous thing. There's
Mm,
always going to be people out there who think that they can get away with it. But
yeah,
when you are literally faced with, but that's your DNA in
yeah.
blood on a
And
signed
they
pact
still
with
say,
a
no,
demon,
it's not.
don't know what you're talking about. Like,
I mean, it's like, dude, you're caught red-handed. This was in your room. How can it not be you? You might as well just own up to. I mean, I couldn't lie to save my skin. Do you know what I mean? At all, because someone asked me a direct question, I'm gonna be like, "Yeah, you caught me."
yeah, it was me. But it's
Yeah, it
funny.
was
It's like,
me. Clearly,
I think it all comes down to the fact that, it's not down to the perpetrator to prove that he is innocent. It is down to
yeah,
the prosecution to prove beyond all doubt that he is
yeah,
guilty. So if
yeah,
he just carries on sitting there and denying it, there's always a very slim chance
yeah.
that you get off on a loophole.
That is true. That is very true. Me, for one, I'd just be like, "Yeah, it was me. You caught me," but I wouldn't do that anyway.
Oh, well, yeah.
Well, the portrait that emerged was surreal. A teenager who believed he'd struck a deal with a demon, acting out a fantasy with deadly conviction. A senior officer later told the press it was the most chilling kind of motive, belief without empathy.
The investigation had begun with a missing persons report and ended with something far stranger, a modern murder driven by ancient superstition. Prosecutors later described the killings as a planned and deliberate act to fulfill the conditions of a self-created pact, not spontaneous violence.
Well, the boy who once looked invisible on CCTV now stood exposed. Every step and word traced back to a single night when belief turned into blood.
The trial opened on the 9th of June at 2021 at the Old Bailey in Court 2, the room reserved for cases too brutal or too strange to be anywhere else.
Mm.
Danyal Hussein stood in the dock, flanked by security, wearing a grey suit that didn't fit. The charges were read out one by one. The murders of Bibaa Henry and Nicole Smallman, committed at Fryent Country Park in the early hours of June 6th, 2020.
Well, across the gallery sat family and friends. Bibba's partner, Nicole's friends from university, silent through the formalities. For them, it wasn't the name of the court that carried weight. It was hearing the sisters' names spoken out loud again.
Prosecution began with the scene itself. They described the birthday celebration, fairy lights, laughter, photographs, and the sudden intrusion of violence. Jurors were told that the attacker had moved in silence, stabbing both women repeatedly with a knife he had purchased just days earlier.
Then came the timeline. CCTV showed Hussein heading toward Fryent Country Park just after 1 a.m. and returning home around 4 a.m., limping and with his right hand bandaged. The footage showed him heading towards the main road, his right hand wrapped in what looked like a tissue or some cloth.
Next up were the forensics, and the DNA from a blood-stained knife found near the bodies matched Hussein's blood. The same profile appeared again on the handwritten pact recovered from his bedroom, the one promising murder in exchange for wealth and power. A forensic scientist told jurors the chance of that match belonging to anybody else was less than 1 in a billion.
Photographs of the note were shown on a screen. The note read, "Perform 6 sacrifices every 6 months for as long as I am free and physically capable, in return for winning the Mega Millions super jackpot." Scumbag.
Like,
Honestly.
not even a lifetime's worth of riches
No.
or, an eternity of power. The Mega Millions.
Jesus Christ. Some people's motives on cases is just absolutely absurd.
Yeah, 100%.
Horrendous.
The courtroom heard how that after the killings, Hussein had just walked home bleeding and used his mother's first aid kit to bandage his own wounds. And then later, he went online and bought lottery tickets, 7 of them, using the same address as the one he had listed on the pact.
Absolutely stupid. Oh my gosh. Well, the prosecution framed it simply: a teenager who believed he could bargain with darkness for wealth, and proved his belief by killing two innocent women who had done nothing more than just celebrate their birthday. In one of the final lines of their opening, the Crown's lead counsel said, "To an evil idea of evil, not to its reality." It was a chilling phrase, and it lingered long after he'd sat down.
And as the witnesses began to testify, family, friends, forensic specialists, the sisters' lives came back into the room. Photographs of Bibaa at work, Nicole on stage, the birthday decorations in the park. The prosecution wanted the jury to remember them, not as part of a ritual, but as people who had lived fully right until the moment they crossed paths with a boy who thought he'd made a deal with a demon.
Well, when it was the defence's turn, the courtroom shifted tone. Their task wasn't to deny that Hussein had killed Bibaa and Nicole. The evidence was too overwhelming for that. Instead, they tried to explain it. They suggested he was a loner, isolated during lockdown, drawn into online forums that blurred fantasy and ritual. He had convinced himself he could trade death for fortune. They said not as an act of evil, but as the symptom of a delusion.
Psychiatric assessments were presented, but the experts agreed on one point: Hussein was not psychotic. He knew what he was doing, he knew it was wrong, and he had planned it. The defense tried to soften the narrative that he had been manipulated by the internet, that his belief in the pact was naive, even childlike, but the prosecution reminded jurors of the evidence: the handwritten promise, the knife he'd brought days before, the lottery tickets that he had purchased afterward. Those are deliberate choices, not hallucinations.
Yeah, most definitely. There was definitely planned intent to carry this out.
100%.
Whether, unfortunately, I mean, they clearly wasn't like a planned target, maybe, because unless he knew of them, which he didn't. So he's just stumbled across the two, bless them. And unfortunately, they were his victims. When both sides rested in the court, the judge summed up. He told the jury to look only at evidence, not speculation. 4 key strands, he said, formed the spine of the case: DNA, the CCTV timeline, the handwritten pact, and the weapon. Each piece, strong alone, together, undeniable. The jury retired in silence. It took just over half a day. Pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when they returned, the foreman stood and spoke clearly, guilty of both murders. Hussein didn't move. He stared straight ahead, hands clasped in front of him. The families held one another. The sister's mother, Mina Smallman, sat motionless for a moment before whispering a prayer under her breath. And later, she would say, "I don't think hate is the opposite of love. I think it's indifference. And I refuse to be indifferent."
Bless her. Well, at sentencing, Mrs. Justice Philippa Whipple described the murders as brutal, as they were cowardly. She said Hussein was self-absorbed, arrogant, and obsessed with wealth and power, adding that he carried out the attacks to gain money and power through a contract with a demon, an act both delusional and cruel.
Hussein was sentenced on Thursday, the 28th of October 2021, life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years. The court fell silent again. It wasn't the length of the sentence that stayed with people. It was the idea that belief could twist so far into violence, and that 2 women who had done nothing wrong became its proof.
Well, outside, as cameras flashed and the families left the court, Mina Smallman, the mum, spoke softly to reporters. Quote, "He wanted to serve Satan. We serve love." It was the final word that mattered.
In the weeks after the verdict, Fryent Country Park began to fill with light again. People left flowers along the same path the sisters had walked, candles flickering in the grass where the fairy lights had once glowed. At first, it was family and friends, then neighbours, and then complete strangers. Messages written on paper hearts, for Bibaa and Nicole, for laughter, for light.
On Tuesday, the 3rd of August 2021, a vigil was held at Fryent Country Park, organised by Reclaim These Streets and supported by Mina Smallman. The event was live streamed and attended by hundreds. The same hillside where the birthday photos were taken became a place of remembrance. Mina Smallman stood before the crowd, the wind lifting her hair, and thanked those who came. She said, "Evil didn't win that night. We came back, and we filled this space with love. It wasn't spectacle, it was reclamation. The kind that happens quietly, one candle at a time."
Well, this case also forced the Metropolitan Police to confront something deeper than procedure. In the months that have followed, it emerged that two serving officers had taken photographs of the sisters' bodies at the crime scene and shared them in a WhatsApp group. The images were accompanied by messages referring to the victims as dead birds. The disrespect was just staggering, and not only a violation of protocol, but of humanity.
I actually remember that. I remember hearing about that on the news. And absolutely disgusting. That is so vile of police people, police officers to be doing that.
Whose literal job is to keep people safe.
Mm-hmm. And this is the thing, what with trust in police, it's absolutely horrendous. I can't imagine, how the families would have felt knowing that the officers have basically just disrespected their family members that way. It's absolutely horrendous. Well, when that story broke, public outrage was immediate and ferocious. Clearly, I felt it. I still feel it, remembering.
Even reading about it, it makes your blood boil.
Yeah. I do know officers, they're like us. It's, a lot of officers, it's just a job to them, but they need to remember their authority and the role that they are supposed to play. And doing something like this, horrendous. Luckily,
dignity for the humans.
Definitely. Well, luckily, both officers, PC Dennis Jaffa and PC Jamie Lewis, were both sentenced at the Old Bailey on Monday, the 6th of December 2021, 2 years and 9 months each, after pleading guilty to misconduct in public office. The sentencing judge, Mr. Justice Mark Lucroft, QC, called their actions appalling and inexplicable, adding that they had betrayed their position of trust in the most grotesque way, which many of our listeners out there will be feeling exactly the same. Absolutely grotesque.
It's just the indignity.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad enough that these two poor women were murdered by somebody that delusional, and now you want to make a mockery of that.
Yeah, absolutely horrendous.
The scandal became a turning point for the Met. It sparked renewed scrutiny of internal culture, leading to updated guidance on professional standards, digital evidence handling, and respect for victims at crime scenes. Under pressure from both public and parliamentary inquiry, the force expanded training for new recruits, adding modules on ethics, integrity, and the unseen harm that police behaviour can inflict on families already in grief.
It was a small reform in practical terms, but symbolically it mattered. For many, it marked an overdue acknowledgement that justice begins at the scene long before a case ever reaches court. That policy shift, small as it seemed, became one of the case's lasting legacies, a recognition that justice doesn't end in court, but begins in how people are treated, even when they can no longer speak.
I just can't believe that it would have to get to the point where you need to implement that as a policy.
I know. You'd think, it's a common sense thing, really, but...
Why aren't they just decent human beings?
Yeah.
For the family...
Just don't expect it from the police.
No. This is what I mean. They're in such a position of trust and power, and you think that they are there doing everything they can to bring you closure, to bring the person responsible to justice, and instead they're mocking you behind your back.
Yeah.
It's just disgusting.
Luckily, they did get sentenced and serve some time for that, because that is
not long enough, if you ask me.
No, not acceptable at all, though.
No. And for the families, the aftermath has never been about closure, only continuation. Mina Smallman, a retired Church of England archdeacon, became a public voice for reform. She spoke about the need to rebuild trust, but also about faith. not the kind tied to ritual or fear, but the kind that survives them. Forgiveness, she said in one interview, isn't saying that what happened is okay. It's saying that we won't let it turn us into something else.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, I would like to think if I ever experienced, I could have that strength to not be kept in anger and be able to kind of see a way to find light again after something so tragic. But I think, it's about hope, isn't it? Hope, faith, and definitely not
Absolutely.
forgiveness. I don't think you fully forgive or you'll never forget, but having
No.
faith in the kindness of humanity that hopefully there's more of that than darkness out there.
Yeah.
The sisters' names now live on through community art projects and vigils held each June. Fryent Park remains open, still used for walks, birthdays and photographs. And when the grass grows tall again in the summer, the spot where the fairy lights once hung looks just like any other, until you know what happened there and how people chose to respond.
The story of Bibaa Henry and Nicole Smallman doesn't end with the man who took their lives. It ends with everyone who refused to let him define them.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that was the Signed in Blood, the story of Danyal Hussein. Thank you so much to Fauna from Echoes from the Loam for joining me this week. If you haven't listened to her show yet, it's a beautifully eerie mix of horror, folklore, and the strange corners of history. So definitely check it out if this interests you.
Well, thank you, my love. It's been a pleasure crossing worlds with Murder Most British.
Oh, it's been brilliant. It's very good. I've really enjoyed having you here with me this week.
Yeah, it's been lovely. It's really good to do a collab, and especially on cases like this when our worlds do collide.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. Well, as always, thank you guys for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a follow, leave a comment and share it. Also, you can give us some stars. It really helps us with others finding us in the algorithm. You can find us at Murder Most British on Instagram, TikTok, and MMB Podcast on Facebook.
And there's a link tree below with everywhere you can follow, listen, and support.
Until next week, stay safe and stay curious.
See you later.
Bye-bye.